Catches me out every time. Hey guys, could you please let me know if you can hear me and see me? And although I'd love to see your faces, if you can make sure that you're muted and your cameras are off. And I will share my screen. So this is going to be the last in the UCAT series of the surgeries. Hi, Kieran. Thank you guys for turning up, and if any of you have been to the ones previously as well, thank you for the support. It's been pretty fun. Hopefully, it's been useful for those of you who have kind of been to the other ones. So I will now just share my screen. So some sort of basic things. So it'll last about an hour. This one might be a little bit under that. It kind of depends on how many questions there are. So once again, even though I asked for webinar functionality, unfortunately it's kind of set up as a meeting on Zoom, which means we don't have the Q&A actually on Zoom. So what we'll basically have to do is use Slido, which if you guys have been to previous ones, then you'll know all about that. Basically, if you go onto slido.com, then you can log on with the hashtag 6med, and that will enable you to kind of post your questions, and I'll be able to see them. So let me just sort this the screen sharing out. So once again, that's slido.com, hashtag 6med, and then you can kind of put your questions there for the Q&A. Today, I'm going to be going over the kind of scoring and the kind of results and that kind of aspect of the UCAT. But as usual, if you want to ask me any questions, feel free to. That's any aspect of the application. Let me just try and sort this slide out. And any feedback you guys have as well on kind of the surgeries before, that would be very well received by both 6med and myself, because it's always nice to hear the feedback. And if you didn't go to any of the surgeries, then let us know why. If it's a case of timing, and if there are better days, then it's good for us to kind of have that feedback. So okay, I think I've now got this sorted. There we go. So I've got just an opening poll for you guys to answer here. And we're getting to the stage now where some people have kind of sat their UCAT. It's kind of coming up for a lot of people. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what kind of spread we have here. And also, I think it's important to remember that for people just kind of at the early stages of the practice, a lot of this stuff will be quite scary. Stuff like verbal reasoning, when you first go through it, you'll be scoring pretty poorly. But yeah, hopefully, those kind of things will start to iron themselves out. So nearly everyone has voted, and I'll show you kind of the results. Just give a few more seconds for the last few people to vote. Okay, and you can see there we've got a pretty kind of good spread there, and I think it's worth kind of thinking about why you put what answer you put. Obviously, if you're saying you'll do quite well or you're going to destroy it, that's really good. If you're in the first two camps, hopefully you'll start to kind of think about why you're sort of feeling these feelings, trying to kind of win that sort of mind game, and hopefully you will feel in a more positive headspace when you come to actually sitting the UCAT. So let's get started. So as I said, this is the last 6med surgery. Could that SHH, could you mute yourself, please? Or I think I can. Oh yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so some of you guys may know me from various 6med things I've done. So my name's Hardeep. I'm just about to start my final year at Cambridge. And I've been doing kind of, these surgeries and various videos and things for quite a while. I sat the UCAT back when it was the UK CAT. I've also done the BMAT. So, feel free to ask me about any aspect of that. You can see my universities there, and kind of through those universities, I had experience of all three interview types. So again, feel free to ask me about any of that. I recently did some videos, which I will kind of talk about a little bit later as a very shameless plug. which will be thinking kind of beyond the UCAT and when you're getting closer to medical school. Because I think it's always good to take a step back and remember, why you're doing what you're doing, which is exactly what I've been doing coming up to my final year of medicine. It can be really easy to get stuck in all of these exams, but I think it's good to look at, the end process and where you're getting to. And hopefully, some of you guys have seen on social media that the new kind of F1s, the new junior doctors, just started, and obviously there's a lot of excitement around that. And you guys just need to think in hopefully kind of 6 years time that will be you, and that's why you're kind of slogging through what you're doing here. So that's my kind of motivational bit. And yeah, so we're just gonna, briefly go through some of the scoring and results. So, starting with the absolute basics. I mean, you guys know this, but you have the first four sections, which are, um, score 300 to 900. A common question that we get asked is, what is a good score? It somewhat depends on the individual university, and I've got a big kind of table to show you. I think on the next slide, maybe, which kind of gives you an indicator as to what stats different universities tend to have. I've put a link on here to a really good PDF that basically goes through each medical school. It's kind of like the official hub for all of the medical schools and their kind of entrance requirements. And there's good information on there. So, as a general kind of rule of thumb, getting over an average of 600 is, a good score. Getting over an average of 700 is a competitive score. And if you get an average of kind of 750 or over, basically the UCAT isn't really going to be an issue for you. But there'll be people getting in with kind of 550s and that sort of thing, because they've strategically applied to universities who perhaps don't weight the UCAT as much. And also you have to think about the other aspects of your application. So if you have really strong GCSEs, you have a really strong personal statement, you can get away with a slightly weaker UCAT. And I think that's really important to remember. Similarly with the SJT, I know that can be a section that some students really struggle with. Generally speaking, most students get band 1 and 2. Some universities won't consider your application if you get a band 4. And again, I've kind of indicated that on the next slide. So that's something really important to think about. And if you don't think you're going to perform that well on the SJT, there are some universities that don't use it at all, or only use it as a sort of kind of discriminator between two similar candidates. So it may be worth applying to those universities. And just to get you kind of in the mindset, again, you'll know about this, but you'll go to your kind of center or wherever you're doing the UCAT, and you'll sit it, and then you get your score straight away. So there's no kind of waiting around like there is for the BMAT. And it's pretty nerve wracking, but then hopefully your score will be good, and then you'll kind of feel quite positive. And then take a bit of time. Try not to get too overwhelmed thinking about the what ifs. Take a bit of time later that day to kind of review how you kind of went through the process. Was there anything you thought you could improve? As ultimately that's going to help you in the future with your kind of exams. And then you don't need to do anything special with the UCAT score unless you've specifically been told. So they'll be automatically sent, I think, in November time to universities. So here is the massive table. I'm not going to go through this kind of bit by bit. You guys will get access to the slides and the recording. So this is here for you to kind of have as a reference. There's quite good information on the uni admissions website, which is where I got, I think, the next kind of graph and the information from. But the PDF that I mentioned is there on the right. So, as I said, you'll get these slides. So feel free to pop that hyperlink in. But just a few things to kind of point out. So, so I've kind of indicated where universities use the UCAT together with the rest of your application. And that's where I've put kind of holistic. Some universities don't use the SJT at all. So you can see Bristol there doesn't use the SJT, and Southampton. Some of them won't accept you if you get a band 4. And some of them will have essentially some sort of cutoff which is internalized. So it won't be an overall kind of national cutoff. It'll be of the students who apply there. They'll take, say, the top 75%. So the bottom 25% scores will get kind of unfortunately won't be invited. So some people ask me, and I think I've got a query as well about dentistry. the information is a bit sparse there in terms of kind of collating the information together. I think the best way to go about it, and actually the best way even with this table, is to go into the specific universities' individual websites, take a look at what they have for the UCAT. Sometimes they can be really helpful and give you some good information. Sometimes the information is really sparse. And so I think what you'll need to do is basically make a table like this for yourself of the universities you want to apply to, what they say about the UCAT, and then if you need more information, if you email them, and I think that will probably be the best approach to answer anyone, including the person who sent me that query. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, the focus tends to be on medicine a lot, and I do feel for our dentistry colleagues sometimes. But yeah, so that table will be there for you to kind of take a look at. Um, the reason why that's important is just because you can think about applying strategically based on your strengths. And so, consider the rest of your application, consider how well you're doing on your practices and what you reckon your kind of ballpark figure might be. Try and be quite realistic with yourself. And, just remember that ultimately medical school is medical school. And so, the important thing is kind of getting in because that will enable you to get onto the pathway to become a doctor, which, is in the kind of distant future for you guys. It's in the near future for me. And yeah, I can tell you that once you kind of get into medical school, even though the kind of hoop jumping and stuff does kind of exist, it's at least more sort of clinical. And this is unfortunately the stage where you guys just need to sort of get this stuff done. So some kind of stats here. So yeah, I should credit the uni admissions website, which have this. I mean, the information is freely available, but I thought it was presented quite nicely. So you can see a few kind of key points from this. So this goes kind of the older years towards the right. So you can see recently, a lot more people are taking the UCAT as a whole, and there will probably be more again this year. You can see, generally verbal reasoning is where most students struggle, and that makes sense considering it's probably the most pressurized section in terms of time. And so, if you are struggling with verbal reasoning, I've seen a few people on the WhatsApp group kind of talking about that. Do remember that you don't necessarily have to do as well on that. You can make up for it in other sections, and you'll basically be reflecting the kind of average or the sort of overall cohort. If you do really well in verbal reasoning, obviously that's great, and that's a really good opportunity to kind of climb up the percentiles. Um, and another thing to kind of bear in mind is with the SJT. So you can see most people actually get kind of band 1 and 2. It's a good kind of third of people get each. So if you're kind of hovering around the sort of band 3, band 4 mark, obviously definitely focus some time on it. But it may just be that there are some kind of fundamental concepts and some exam strategy that you're struggling with. And so it may be worth considering applying to a university that doesn't use the SJT or maybe weights it a lot lower. And again, that would be where you kind of refer back to this table. And yeah, so feel free to kind of have a look at kind of past stats. Universities should give their individual stats, so you can see for any given university what was the kind of average offer holders UCAT score, what was the kind of lowest, what was the highest, and that will give you a kind of idea as to where approximately you would sit. So some of them have quite high sort of thresholds. So generally speaking, somewhere like King's, for example, is going to be super competitive. It's going to have probably a high average UCAT score. So it may be worth applying somewhere else if you don't think you're going to score that strongly on your UCAT. But if you're doing very well and you're doing really well on your practices and you end up getting a really strong score, then obviously it's perfectly fine to apply somewhere there. So that's kind of the scoring aspect. I didn't want to go through the kind of basics that you guys know about 300 to 900, etc. So I will now transfer over to Slido. So I'm going to where is it? Let me transfer over. So if you guys can log on to Slido for anyone who may have joined late. If you if you go onto slido.com and put in hashtag 6med, and then this is the audience Q&A bit, and then if you can upvote the questions you want me to answer, so I can see, you know, what the kind of cohort wants me to sort of answer. So in fact, while I'm sharing my screen, I'll show you, just because some people have said they weren't too clear on how that works. So if you just type in Slido, so that's Slido, and then click on it, and it will ask you for a hashtag. And then just putting hashtag 6med, that's lowercase med. So if you go there to that code, if you can see my cursor. So yeah, and you know, if you can't get onto Slido, feel free to put a question in the chat. But you know, I have to kind of prioritize the Slido ones because I kind of know how many upvotes it has. So yeah, let me get rid of this. And I hope that was useful because it's a lot of kind of numbers and stats and things. I didn't really want to just sit there and talk through it. You know, I don't think that would be particularly fun. But if anyone wants me to kind of go back and you know, kind of comment on any specific universities, then do let me know. But yeah, I will give you guys a little bit of time just to pop your questions down, and if you go through and kind of upvote the questions you want me to answer, it can be on anything. It doesn't just have to be on the UCAT. It can be on any aspect of the application or life as a medical student. You know, any personal statement tips, things on, you know, what to read, work experience, what life is like as a medical student, you know, any of these sorts of questions. So I can already see a verbal reasoning question going up, and yeah, as I sort of alluded to, you know, that is by far and away the most kind of problematic section for most people, and it's pretty much because, you know, the timing needed and the difficulty in getting that level of reading comprehension in a really quick kind of snappy short space of time is really challenging. So yeah, I'll probably get to answering that soon. So okay, I will answer the first one. So what kind of scores should you be getting in the mocks to know you're ready to take the exam? So it's a good question because essentially it's that conundrum of let's say you're averaging, I don't know, say around like 720 or whatever it is, and you sort of think in your head, okay, you know, that score, if I end up getting that in the actual exam, that'll probably be good enough for where I want to apply. But if I spend another couple of weeks on it, maybe that will jump up, you know, a bit higher. And it's kind of getting that balance right between not sort of plateauing and burning out, but also allowing yourself enough time to kind of progress. And to some extent, it depends on your individual circumstances and how kind of how much you've been revising and how close you are to that kind of level of sort of plateau and fatigue. I think a good kind of indication is how much are you learning kind of per day in terms of when you go over questions? Are you getting kind of quite a few new question kind of formats coming up that you haven't seen before? Are you having to review a lot of information? Do you feel like you're still on that kind of steep part of the learning curve? If, however, you're kind of, you know, most question types and styles you've kind of seen before, and it just tends to be a combination of silly mistakes and, you know, kind of running out of time and those sorts of things. And that's the reason why you're dropping marks. If that's the case, you're probably about ready. Because I think if you're familiar with the kind of question types and styles and, you know, the way they present the information, that's pretty much the level that you get to, where after that it just becomes about repetition. So I think that is probably something to kind of think about. Another thing to think about is what's your kind of dream universities? What universities do you want to sort of aspire to? Um, and then given that, what kind of UCAT score do you realistically need to get? And what are you getting on your mocks? Obviously, it's somewhat confounded by the fact that mocks aren't necessarily 100% accurate. So, you know, there are various different levels of rumors and conjecture that, you know, certain mocks are harder, certain mocks are easier. But generally speaking, you know, you'll probably be within the ballpark of your mock scores. So, you know, if you do a few and you get an average of, say, 650, and you know that the university you want to apply to, generally, you know, the average offer holder will get over 700. then it may be worth thinking, okay, do I need to switch my university choice, or should I sit a later UCAT and actually spend a bit more time? That's probably kind of the two main areas I would be thinking about. Now, in terms of the actual scores themselves, um, you know, again, as I kind of said before, anything over 600 is a good score. Anything over 650, you're starting to get into the more competitive range. And I'd say anything over 700 should be a good complement to an otherwise strong application. So if you're, not hitting 600, you probably need to do more practice. If you're hitting the sort of 600 to 700 mark, you need to consider the rest of your application and where you want to apply to. If you're getting kind of over 700, especially if you're getting into kind of 750 and above, you should be fine. As long as you sort of understand that it may not go exactly the same as your mocks in the actual exam, and you feel like you kind of have got to the point where you're familiar with the question types. So that's my very long rambling answer to that question, but I hope that's useful. And I know it's a really difficult balance to strike, but ultimately, as long as you put in the hours and you have a good firm kind of understanding of the basic foundations, so you haven't just been blasting out the questions, you've actually been sort of understanding the process behind them. Theoretically, you should be in a good place for your actual test. And even if you don't do as well as you kind of thought you would, I certainly didn't do as well as I did in the sort of couple of mocks I took, which back then weren't that great. But it's a little bit disappointing. But ultimately, you'll either get a score which is still good, which is what happened to me, or you'll get one which isn't maybe as good, and you may have to switch your university choices, or you might just have to do it again. Either way, in 5 years' time, none of that will really matter. So yeah, again, trying to keep stuff in context. So verbal reasoning, yeah, it's really tricky. Obviously, go back to the kind of verbal reasoning surgery recording and look at the slides if you want to just brush up a little bit on it. In terms of kind of how to get better at it, I mean, ultimately, it's about getting a process down and then applying that process under timed conditions. So the process is, look for the keywords, look in the passage, answer the question. If it's quite a complex question, or you're spending too long on it, discard the answers that are obviously wrong, guess one of the remaining ones, and then move on to the next one. And basically repeat that until the section is done, and then breathe a sigh of relief. That's effectively the best way to go about it. So I think most people make the mistake of either reading, kind of skimming the whole passage first, which doesn't really help you, or you'll kind of launch into questions straight away and just try and sort of brute force it rather than spending the time at the beginning, just for maybe a week or two, maybe not even that long, maybe just a few days, understanding the process. So do you know what kind of keywords are good to look out for? Do you know what the different question types are and how you might need to change your process depending on the question type? Are you able to kind of quickly pick out keywords? And when you do that, do you know what to do with the rest of the passage? All of these kind of things, which I covered in the surgery. It's covered in the UCAT masterclass. Should be lots of free resources as well. And then once you have that down, applying that to questions in a timed manner, and starting off, it'll be really frustrating, and you won't do that well. And then you'll start to get better and better. If you want to supplement this with some skim reading on the side as a way to sort of revise your kind of fast comprehension, that can be a good thing to do as well. I think for some people that really helps. For others, I think it just makes you feel a bit worse. But it might be worth considering that. And there are a few ways you can do that. I think there are some good kind of websites and apps and things that kind of test your skim reading abilities. So you could maybe do that to supplement what you're doing, but ultimately getting that foundation and then applying it to questions, and then kind of starting off with maybe a little bit more time than you get in the exam, and then slowly kind of reducing that down, is probably the best approach. The other thing to do if you're really struggling with verbal reasoning is have a play about with different ways of going about the questions, and see if there's anything different that works for you. Maybe you are someone who does better if you kind of understand what the passage is about first. So you kind of skim it to know what the kind of subject area is, how they like to put random stuff in there. And then once you know that, you can kind of have that sort of streamlined thought process, and you can then read the question and maybe understand it a bit better. There's no harm in kind of exploring that and seeing if it works better for you. But yeah, so that would be my overall kind of advice. And as a sort of safety net as well, as I said before, the kind of cohort average is normally around kind of 550. So people don't do as well on that as the other sections anyway. So if there's one section where you're not going to do as well, that's probably a decent one to do that. Okay, so I've already set the UCAT and got 2520, 460, 650, 680, 730 in band 4. Do you have any tips on how I can increase my score this year? Yeah, so I think, whenever you're thinking about having already done a test, the first thing to do is to review. So what did you do last time? Specifically, what techniques did you use? How long did you work for? What was your approach? What do you think you did well? And what do you think you could have improved on? Did you not spend enough time? Did you not take the time to kind of understand the kind of underlying questions and the processes and the different question types? Did you use kind of resources that aren't that good? All of these sorts of questions. Once you have that, then I think you need to start honing in on the weaknesses. So I assume you've put it in the order of VR first. So I guess that would be VR as 460, or whatever section that might be. Is clearly one to kind of brush up on, because the others are pretty solid. Um, and addressing those kind of weaknesses. The SJT is maybe something you need to kind of revisit. But as I said before, if the SJT is just something you really struggle with, you just you're not really sure on the technique for the questions, you can either think about getting some tutoring if you have the money. But that's very much a personal choice, because as I said before, some universities don't even use the SJT, and so it may be worth applying to those universities and just making sure that your 4 sections have a higher score. But yeah, just to summarize, I would review what you did last time, look at what you did well and make sure you do that again, look at what you could have improved on. Definitely kind of have a look around at different resources, see which ones you get on with the best. When it comes to UCAT questions, I think pretty much the 6med Ninja and Medify are kind of the two that most people use. Medify, I think, has a lot more questions, maybe even too much. 6med, I think, is slightly more realistic, so it's the balance between the two. And then, so review, start to kind of work in a structured manner, focus on your kind of weak areas and try and improve them. And then, hopefully you'll get a better score, but you need to think about kind of applying strategically as well. So that would be my advice. And remember that applying again is an advantage in itself, because it won't be that new to you. You might have the added pressure of feeling like you have to do really well, but you'll be more familiar with the kind of format. You'll have gone through the process before, so you're actually in a very good position. So yeah, I would be pretty confident in yourself. So what do I think got me into Cambridge? Okay, good question. Okay, so first and foremost, I had solid academics. I was by no means a child genius. I got all I started GCSEs, so I did pretty well there. But that's GCSEs. Cambridge don't really care too much about that. I got 3 A stars at A level. I met people there who had like 100% UMS, and like four A stars, 5 A stars, that sort of thing. I just did the basic kind of biochem maths. I got like a 94% UMS average. My BMAT was good, but by no means groundbreaking. And again, I met people there who got kind of 8s, and someone got like 9, 8.95A. She's actually now an F2 and is very good. So fair play to her. So yeah, I had that kind of academic foundation, but I think the most important thing about Cambridge is the interview. They tend to, especially certain colleges over others, but overall they tend to weight the interview pretty highly, and that makes sense when you consider they about 80% of candidates they will invite to interview. So clearly that is the biggest kind of factor that they're looking at. And essentially what you need to do is You need to be someone who is, interesting, um, fairly well-rounded, and someone who's teachable. That's probably the most important aspect. And if I were to be, say, I don't know, personally mentoring someone or tutoring someone, and my aim was to try and get them into Cambridge, I would focus on the interview quite a lot. And so what I would focus on is making sure your personal statement facilitates kind of good interview discussion. So putting in some interesting bits about yourself. I have a bit of an anecdote about that, which I can say later on if we have time. And then during your interview, the important thing is to essentially have a go, because what they do with their interview style is they give you questions that are beyond your sort of understanding of the subject by design. And then they will give you kind of prompts, use your existing knowledge, possibly using stuff that you've mentioned, you've kind of, done projects on and that sort of thing. And then they will try and sort of probe you. Now, the thing is, you're all very intelligent people, and what you're used to doing is sitting down for an exam and guessing the right answers for most, if not all, of the questions. Um, this is a very different environment to the Cambridge interview, where it's not necessarily about getting the right answer; it's about the approach to it. So if you kind of struggle with the idea of not knowing the answer and you kind of give up, then that's not going to be a particularly good performance. What they want to see is that you kind of try, you apply the kind of principles you take their prompts, you have a think, you take a step back, think systematically, and kind of go from there. Because essentially, that's what you're going to be doing when you have supervisions with them in medical school. So they want to see, are you nice to teach? Are you someone who completely kind of flags when you don't know the answer, or are you willing to kind of have a go? And be polite, make a few jokes, and hopefully it'll all work out. That's essentially what happened with me. So yeah, I hope that that kind of helps. I don't think there was any sort of secret. I didn't really get much help from my school. I went to kind of a normal sixth form. I didn't get any kind of Cambridge specific interview practice. I didn't really know too much about the application process. I definitely went in not fully knowing what the interview was like. So yeah, overall it was actually quite a bad experience, but I still managed to get in. I think just because I kind of luckily went about the interview in the approach that they kind of liked. So yeah, that's what I would say overall. I hope that answers your question. If you want to ask any follow up questions, then feel free to. So I'm conscious of time. I do have a little bit to talk about. So what I will do is I will just go back to the PowerPoint and talk about. We've got a new thing out, which I'll just talk to you guys very briefly about, again, just as part of kind of taking a step back and remembering why you're doing what you're doing. Um, Feel free to keep putting down questions and keep upvoting them, because I will go back and answer your questions. Just wait for this to go. Okay. Okay, so yeah, oh, that's a lot of lag. So we recently come out with this thing called the 6med Pro Masterclass. I'll just chat about this very briefly, and I don't get any commission or anything from this. I just think it's something to bring to your attention, to kind of think about once you've got your offer, because you should think positively. Statistically, a good chunk of you guys will get your kind of dream offer, especially if you're working with someone like 6med or whoever. So essentially, what we did was kind of pull together a lot of information, and I kind of annoyed all of the 6med people by being really kind of pedantic about the PowerPoints and the content we have and that kind of stuff. But I think it's pretty good what we've done. It's essentially kind of 10 plus hours split into the sections you can see on the right. And it's essentially to bridge the gap between what you guys have done at kind of A level and starting off in medical school. So it's by no means a kind of full syllabus, but it's going through some of the core principles. And so the idea is that it's a good reference for you. It will help you to kind of get to grips with some of this information, and will make first year easier for you and essentially give you a bit of a head start. So I've tried to kind of put in, clinical information and integrations and some general tips for medical school, especially in the last section where I talk about study skills. Um, so you can see a kind of snippet from that. I didn't pick the snippet, but I think it's a decent one. And so you can see that screenshot there. I made sure to take one where I look like an idiot. So that will be kind of what the screen actually looks like. So there'll be the sort of PowerPoint video that I talked through on the sort of big screen, and then you'll see me with my plant, which is now half dead, just kind of talking through it. So yeah, that's kind of something that we've recently come out with. Feel free to take a look at it. We've worked pretty hard on it. I filmed a lot, destroyed my voice in the process, and we thankfully so far there's been good feedback on it. The same with the other masterclasses. So that's the kind of UCAT, BMAT, personal statement, interview masterclasses. The feedback generally has been pretty good. So yeah, that's a very, very short plug. We'll now go back to the Q&A. If anyone has any questions about that, then let me know. Okay, so I've got one about the BMAT. Okay, so that's a pretty broad question, tips for BMAT. So I will assume you haven't started off yet. I think anyone who's going to sit the BMAT, the first thing you need to do, the same with any exam, is get really familiar with what the format of it is. So what are each of the sections? What specifically are they going to be asking you? What are the different question types? And what kind of prerequisite knowledge do you need to have? And all of this is summarized on any decent kind of admissions website, and also on the kind of official BMAT website itself. So start off with that, and then they have a kind of recommended syllabus. I would say go through that almost like you're revising for your A levels, and then start to kind of apply it to your questions. The thing with the BMAT is it's similar to the UCAT in that you do need to learn kind of how to approach their questions, but it's also very different to the UCAT in that it's not so much about the kind of time and how it's just bashing out questions with kind of 20 seconds per question, but instead it's about kind of thinking and applying things a little bit more. And obviously there's an essay component, which I think is actually it's not too difficult to get a decent score on the essay. I think I got a 4.5A on mine. I think there's a good kind of formulaic way to go about it. And, I talk about this stuff in quite a lot of detail in the BMAT masterclass. So if you have a bit of money, it's got good feedback. But, essentially going through it systematically is, I think, the best way. I think it would be good to kind of look at where your weaknesses would be first of all. So for me personally, I didn't do physics A level. I didn't really like physics. So the kind of physics and maths areas were where I focused a lot of my time early on. And also kind of getting to grips with the kind of section 1 stuff. So what's actually involved in the different sections? What are the different question types they can ask you? I think that's super important, because that's kind of like the sort of decision-making section, in that it's a little bit kind of a bit sort of abstract. There are lots of different question types that they can ask you, and it's kind of all put under this umbrella of sort of critical thinking and or thinking skills, and whatever it is they say now. So those are probably my main tips. If you have any kind of specific questions on the BMAT, feel free to kind of pop them down. I should also mention, because I don't think we'll get through all of these questions, if there are any that I don't answer, as always, feel free to email them to team@sixmed.co.uk. So how many practice questions would I recommend to do per day? So I think I've got that question with every surgery, and annoyingly, my answer hasn't changed. And that's essentially, it depends. I don't think there is a golden amount. I think it depends on how you work as a person. I think it depends on what stage of your revision you're at. But what you need to think about is, how many practice questions do you have on whatever platform you're using? How much time do you have before your test? What kind of scores are you getting right now? And then you can kind of work backwards from that. If you feel like you're not making decent progress, increase the amount of questions you're doing. I also think it would be a good idea to have some days where you don't do as many, and kind of build it up, and then have a few days where you kind of are chilling out a little bit. as you know, that's going to kind of reflect how you should be working kind of later on in medical school, where you know it's not really that sustainable to be working flat out kind of week after week. And so yeah, I'm not going to give a specific number to that because I don't think a specific number exists. And anyone who tells you it does is not really thinking about how different everyone is. So yeah, I'm sorry if that's an annoyingly diplomatic answer, but yeah, I will not move from that. So any tips on how to move from average to do well? So I assume that's talking about the UCAT. I think if you're getting kind of average scores, it may be best. I mean, firstly, think about, is that average across all of them, or is that average as in your combined score is average, but some are good, some sections you're scoring well in, some you're not scoring as well in. Because in that case, obviously, you need to address those sections in which you're not doing that well. If you're kind of doing quite consistent across the board, but relatively average, it may just be that you need to do more practice questions. It might be a good idea to kind of note down the specific types of questions that you're getting wrong, because there may be a theme, there may be certain question kind of almost like subtypes that you're getting wrong. So for example, if with abstract reasoning you find the type 2 and type 3 questions really hard, but the type 1 and 4 you're better at, and then that might be something you'll then be able to address. I think also, if you've been revising for a while and you feel like you've plateaued, it may be, and this might be, a shocking thing to say, but it may be worth taking a little bit of a break. Only a kind of short one, but just refresh your mind a little bit and then come back to it. It's one of the hardest things to do, and it's something you'll probably continue to kind of have challenges with in medical school. It's that feeling of kind of guilt when you're not doing work and you feel like you should be because everyone else is working, and ultimately it's super competitive, so you should be doing what everyone else is doing. But when you think about longevity, it might be a good idea to take a little bit of a break, and then when you come back you'll be more refreshed, you'll be able to work harder, and then that can help you to kind of get out of these plateaus. um, and Yeah, sorry, I got a kind of chat question, which I actually think is quite a good question. So I'll probably answer that. So the question about Kings, average of 700, SJT band one. So I mean, the SJT is obviously very solid. The average of 700. I think it will somewhat depend on the rest of your application. So if we go into, I don't know if it'll show you the screen, but if you go into the kind of table, so Kings is kind of a sort of holistic one. So they kind of take everything into account. But I do think that generally people will be going in with kind of an average in the sort of 3000s. Most people will be. That doesn't mean that you won't get in with a kind of not an average, sorry, a total score of kind of over 3000. Doesn't mean you won't get in. It just means that, as long as you have a solid application in terms of the rest, your grades and personal statement and that sort of thing, then you'll be in with a good chance. So I wouldn't say it's a definite no unless it happens to be a particularly strong year. If you wanted a little bit more in-depth stats on that, so I'd say go onto the King's website, and I do think they have their kind of stats in terms of offer holders' UCAT scores, which would be good to take a look at and see, how many people got a sort of total of a sort of average of 700, or a total of 2800, and that will maybe give you a better indication. But yeah, the SJT is obviously fine. So I think I'm debating whether or not to answer the private message I got, which is about the day before the exam. So good luck to anyone doing their exam soon. If anyone's doing it on Wednesday, you'll have the added luck of it being on my 25th birthday. So yeah, I will be rooting for you especially hard on that day. And yeah, I think the day before your exam is definitely a good idea to take some time out. You need to get into a good habit of approaching exams in a healthy manner. I've done the whole, staying up till the early hours of the morning before an exam. It's a really bad place to be. You're just not going to perform as well as you could do. So I think a combination of eating right, doing some exercise, kind of reviewing some final bits, but not panicking too much. Just a few questions. If you get a question wrong the day before, I mean, don't worry about it. Just remember, it's better to get it wrong the day before than on the actual test day. And then try and get an earlier night. You might not be able to sleep early, but try to do that. Get everything ready the night before, so there's nothing to kind of worry about. If you've got kind of loud family members and annoying siblings and pets and stuff, try and kind of filter that out the morning of, and sort of tell everyone, to chill out the next morning. And if you're getting like a lift there, make sure you have kind of contingencies and they know what time to leave, and all of that stuff, just to put yourself into a good mindset. And then, just before the exam, a few deep breaths, get that parasympathetic nervous system going. And yeah, just remember that if you kind of put the work in, and ultimately once it's done, it's a pretty good feeling. Even if you don't do as well as you hoped you would, just the fact that it's done is quite nice, because then you don't have to look at any more verbal reasoning questions, at least for maybe another year. So yeah, that's my answer to that question. So how are we doing on time? Okay. So how did I manage revising for both the BMAT and the UCAT? So if I remember correctly, I only had kind of a short overlap period. So I think I did my UCAT relatively early. So I basically, focused on UCAT mainly. As I started to get closer, I started to look at the BMAT, and so that worked out quite well for me. If you're doing the two concomitantly, if you're doing them kind of side by side, then I think it's worth splitting up your day. So you can maybe have UCAT in the morning, BMAT in the evening, or vice versa, switching it up a little bit. And it can be good to keep things very separate, but some people I think also work quite well if they integrate things. So there are some overlaps in terms of some of the information you need, and so it could be good to kind of incorporate that into it. And yeah, I mean, you'll have to be kind of good with your timing if you want to use stuff like the Pomodoro technique, to make sure you're kind of being kind of streamlined in your revision approach. Then that can be good. I personally don't like the exact Pomodoro technique. I do a kind of different version of it. If you don't know what that is, it's I mean, there's lots of good resources about what it is. Yeah, I can spell it in the chat if anyone wants it. But yeah, it's something that a lot of the kind of yeah, especially medic YouTubers and productivity YouTubers like to talk about. But yeah, so I think it'd be good to kind of split your time up kind of efficiently, and make sure that you're kind of dedicating time equally to both, based on your university choices. Now, obviously, if you're only applying to one BMAT university or only applying to one UCAT university, that's going to change your priorities. And so you actually might want to spend a little bit more time on one over the other. And then I think it's always a good idea to make sure that the two tests are a little bit far apart, so you can have your UCAT done. Normally, UCAT will be done first, and then you have, say, a few weeks of just dedicated BMAT revision, when you can really make a lot of progress. So I think that will probably be the best approach, and that was pretty much what I did. Although my kind of approach to revising for both wasn't really good, as I've mentioned before. I didn't really, there weren't really too many resources out there that weren't astronomical in price. And yeah, I didn't really approach it as well as I maybe could have. But yeah, so I noticed that the official UCAT mocks give fairly short passages, especially compared to the UCAT package I use. It's reflective of the actual exam. So I think the actual exam is quite variable in terms of kind of passage length. And that's actually one of the things that can help you in things like VR, is if there's one with a super long passage, it might be worth skipping that straight off the bat. I mean, mocks are never kind of truly representative, because they obviously can't use exact questions, but I think it depends on the kind of the service that you're using. Some of them are pretty lazy and will just kind of come up with questions that have the same format but have a very different tone, that are a lot more basic. And so if you find that most of them are quite short, and the sort of concepts are quite basic and the questions are quite basic, chances are that's not going to be a particularly representative mark. It'll still be useful for practice, but you might find that when you do the actual exam, not only will the lengths of the passages be a bit kind of longer and denser, but the actual kind of tone and the kind of terminology used will be different as well. So that is something to bear in mind. I think it's always good to take a look at a kind of different providers, different kind of resources, and get a feel for what's out there, and then kind of compare that to the ones that the official UCAT website have, and you can kind of see which ones are similar. I think generally the 6 med ninja and I think Medify questions are normally said to be quite representative. So yeah, I hope that's useful. So okay. Last few questions. So how should I structure my revision if I have 6 weeks left? So okay, that's a very good amount of time. Would you be able to comment on that? I think you can comment. And can you let me know whereabouts you are in terms of your revision process? Are you just starting, or have you done some? Because that will kind of change the question. Um, so yeah, the question below about SJT and how it's marked. I'm pretty sure they allow partial marks. I haven't seen. I was looking to see if there's any SJT information that they'd come out with recently, and I didn't see any. So I assume they haven't changed anything, and therefore allow partial marks. If anyone knows anything different, maybe you've seen an official statement or something like that, then do kind of pop it in the chat or whatever. But I do think they do take into account partial marks in the actual exam. I think the reason why certain providers won't do that probably just be because it's a bit harder to do, so they just won't do it. I think, but yeah. So that's what I would say for that. So yeah, so to the top question there, how should I structure my revision? If you're still in the chat, if you could reply and let me know kind of what level you're at, what stage you're at with your revision. If you can't reply there, then just kind of pop it in the chat and I'll see it there. So tips for a Cambridge applicant. So sorry, I've just seen there, middle of prep. Okay, I'll answer that one first. Okay, so you've got 6 weeks left and you've done the kind of basic stuff. So I think that's actually a really good period of time, and you've given yourself enough time to kind of go through it. So I think it's good to kind of stop right now and kind of look at what kind of scores you're getting. Look at your sort of confidence in the different sections, and also look at your university choices, and kind of collate all of that information together and think, am I on track? If I keep going the way I'm going, am I going to hit the kind of scores I need to hit? I think it's also worth looking at if you've got anything kind of going on in the next 6 weeks that might kind of affect your prep. And then essentially what you need to do is work systematically. So, in the last 2 weeks or so, you want to be essentially pretty ready, doing mocks and scoring pretty well in your mocks. So if you need to do that in, say 4 or 5 weeks time, then, in the next few weeks, what you need to be doing is hitting that kind of steep learning curve part. So, doing lots of questions, getting the repetition in, starting to make things second nature. If there are any particular question types you struggle with, maybe taking a step back on those, doing them untimed, getting the sort of algorithm in place, and then starting to do them timed. Is probably going to be the best bet. So, doing that in the next couple of weeks, kind of stepping it up. And then in the kind of couple of weeks after that, that's when you'll start to kind of focus, do kind of longer stretches, do, kind of whole sections, and maybe even like whole mocks or kind of half mocks. And then in the final 2 weeks, that's when you'll sort of consolidate things. And what you should find is that, you make a lot of progress in the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks, and then it starts to kind of plateau. And you want that plateau to start happening, close to your exam, because that way you know that you're sort of you're getting up to what will be around your sort of maximal score, and then it's just about getting the finer details in. So that's probably what I would say. And so if someone has just started practicing, I've got a one through the chat. So if you just started practicing and you've got 6 weeks left, Essentially, you'll need to use, I'd say, the first week to familiarize yourself with each of the sections and the question subtypes. Go through the kind of surgery recordings that might be useful. Um, and if you have a little bit of money, then I'd recommend the masterclass, just because that will help to shortcut a lot of the stuff. But obviously, if you don't have the money, that's fine. And I think it would be a good idea then, once you're kind of familiar with the basics and you kind of know what the different question types are, make sure you know the approach for the different question types. And that might need a little bit of revision on your part and some research. Um, I've tried to kind of go through it in the master classes, so you'll be able to kind of see it there. And do that in the next kind of couple of weeks, and then you need to start with your kind of pretty solid revision. I mean, you may even start that a bit earlier. Do your kind of question banks, and you essentially want to be quite sort of systematic with it, making sure you're addressing all of the sections, and then you'll essentially be at the point where you're kind of struggling with questions, you're getting quite a lot of them wrong. That's going to happen for a few weeks, and then you'll begin to see the results. And then hopefully in sort of 4 weeks time, you'll have hit that kind of really steep part of the kind of learning curve. And then the sort of week before the exam is when you'll kind of start to plateau. So if you're starting off now, essentially you just need to kind of accelerate through the kind of early process and get to that middle bit a bit quicker. So yeah, that's what I would say. I will finish off with the last question, because my voice is going and it's nearly an hour up. So sorry to those of you whose question I couldn't answer. Again, send them to team@sixmed.co.uk if you want someone to answer them. So tips for a Cambridge applicant. So yeah, like I assume your academics are very good. They don't have to be perfect, as I've already said, but just as long as they're solid. I think, yeah, just the interview really is super important. Try and get some interview practice, and try and get it with someone who knows something about science and have kind of a scientific discussion. I think pursue your interests, especially stuff you put down on your personal statement. Kind of read around it and just follow things that you're interested in. There's no kind of prerequisite for how many articles you have to read, or any particular things that are kind of hidden pathways to get into Cambridge. Just kind of demonstrating your interest is super important. And then in your interview, I think it's really important to just be kind of open, have an open discussion, have a go at the questions, even if you think you're saying something stupid. I said some really stupid things in my interview, some basic errors, but I mean it's part of nerves, and they'll understand that. And as long as you're having a go at the questions, that's ultimately what they're looking for. So yeah, and aside from that, there isn't too much you can do. The Cambridge SAQ doesn't actually really mean much, so don't worry about the kind of extra kind of pseudo personal statement that you can put on there. It doesn't really change much, but obviously it might be good to put some discussion points in. And yeah, best of luck, and I hope to see you in Cambridge. So yeah, that is unfortunately all the time we have. Thank you so much for attending. So that concludes the kind of UCAT portion of these surgeries. Any kind of feedback you have, even if it's just kind of a line, if you could kind of send that either to me if you're on the WhatsApp group, and you can just DM me, or if you want to send it to team@sixmed.co.uk. It's always useful to kind of get feedback. And yeah, I wish you guys the best of luck. I truly hope you all get really good UCAT scores. And just remember to take a step back and remind yourself of why you're doing this. And ultimately, if nothing else, you'll get kind of discount on Domino's with your NHS card. So yeah, I will see you guys potentially short at some point, or maybe on some pre-recorded videos. And I hope you have a good rest of your Sunday.